Good afternoon. Thank you for being here today. It's an honor to talk about the work my colleague Chongwon Park and I have been doing. A special thank you to Korea University and the Korean Association for Digital Humanities. Our talk is organized in 5 parts. We'll begin with a brief discussion of contemporary debates around war, gender, and trauma before introducing the novel and some theoretical context surrounding our work. We'll then introduce the impetus for our research and our research questions. Next, we'll discuss the methods of our study and our results. Finally, we'll offer some thoughts on our findings and potential next steps. To begin, let's take a look at how a novel that's nearly 100 years old still has deeply contemporary applications. You see on the screen here the American President Donald Trump, who's in town this week, and his pick to helm the department formerly known as the Department of Defense, Pete Hegseth. The year before his nomination, Hegseth published a book entitled The War on Warriors, Behind the Betrayal of the Men Who Keep Us Free. The War on Warriors argues against having women in combat roles, and as Secretary of War, Hegseth continues to raise the debate. In a speech just earlier this month, he argued for what he termed the, quote, highest male standards of military preparedness. The assumptions that underpin Hegseth's concern reverberate in discussions that surround war fiction. And as we'll see, All Quiet on the Western Front is a novel that lets us explore the complexities of militarism, combat, and trauma. All Quiet on the Western Front was first published as a German-language serial in 1928 and as a German-language book in 1929. Due to its popularity, the novel was promptly translated into 23 languages, including Arthur Wesley Ween's 1929 English language edition. This is the edition most English-speaking folks encounter. And I should note, Ween was chosen for the job in large part due to his status as a World War I veteran, the same as Remarque. Though in fact, Ween had significantly more experience than Remarque at the front. Remarque was wounded after 6 weeks and spent the remainder of the war in hospital. In 1993, the civilian Brian Murdoch gave a more faithful translation of the text. Katharina Raut prepared her translation in 2024, and Kurt Beals released another edition just this year. The research we'll be discussing today focuses on Ween, Murdoch, and Raut translations. This gives us 3 takes on the novel: Ween, a male veteran, Murdoch, a male civilian, and Raut, a female civilian. In terms of the novel itself, the text has had an outsized impact on the English-speaking imagination and understanding of the real experience of war. The novel is generally read as a Bildungsroman, or a coming-of-age story. Its narrator, Paul Baumer, is a young German soldier who enlisted along with his classmates at the behest of their school teacher. However, while the novel gives a first-person perspective on the experience of basic training and deployment to the Western Front, it also offers a nuanced examination of what modernists would call the rift between conventions of the past and the new reality. A reality created in part by the new technologies and the scale of the destruction of the war. The novel opens with this epigraph: "This book is neither to be an accusation nor a confession, and least of all an adventure, for death is not an adventure to those who stand face to face with it. It will try simply to tell of a generation of men who, even though they may have escaped its shells, were destroyed by the war." We take this metatextual element as a key signal that the novel offers insight into the psychological destruction, meaning trauma, of World War I. Our approach to this project draws from 4 main disciplines: literary theory, trauma theory, translation studies, and the digital humanities, specifically computational linguistics. From literary studies, we acknowledge that it can be tempting to make claims based on idiosyncratic close readings. To counter this, we believe that computational analysis can offer a backstop to stretching too far with our readings and interpretations. From trauma theory, we argue that understanding psychological trauma can help us better treat and support populations impacted by military conflict. In other words, borrowing from Phil Cly, we posit that civilians have a moral stake in war, as well as in the well-being of service members and the military affiliated. And from translation studies, we recognize that different translators make different choices that both reflect and shape their contemporary moment. We believe that understanding the choices in various translations of All Quiet can help us see these historical moments and ourselves more clearly. Now to three key considerations that guide our work. First is that as a diagnostic category, trauma has a complicated and much debated history. For example, psychological trauma has been known by conditions including railway spine, hysteria, neurasthenia, shell shock, post-traumatic stress disorder, and more recently, moral injury. Crucially, contemporary debates frequently center on the unrepresentability or unsayability of psychological trauma. This is an assumption our research seeks to engage with. Similarly, war, specifically combat, is often understood as an epistemologically separate category of experience. The literary scholar James Campbell coined and resisted this notion of combat Gnosticism. Finally, we acknowledge that metaphors, as well as literature and film, have the power to create a reality rather than simply give us a way of conceptualizing a pre-existing reality. And as we see at the highest levels of debate within the Department of War even today, the representation of military affiliated and the traumatized influence our perception and thereby reception of their counterparts in the real world. That brings us to the impetus for our research questions. First, as Kiyoshi Gu, a literary scholar, argued just this year, those who have experienced trauma possess distinctive perceptual frameworks that remain largely inaccessible to those who have not shared in the same encounter. This is the assumption that guides much reading, writing, and discussions around military and veteran experience. This assumption is so pervasive that it leads to the idea that the veteran experience is inaccessible to civilians, or that trauma is literally unspeakable or unsayable. Then, as Brigetta Bush and Tim McNamara argue, linguistics may play a role as one of several approaches to the study of trauma, described as a complex knot that binds together multiple strands of knowledge and which can best be understood through plural, multidisciplinary perspectives. And linguistics seeks, on the other hand, to explore to what extent engaging with trauma can contribute to a better understanding of the discourses of the unsayable. Put differently, while it may be true that things can be hard to speak about or unpleasant to hear, computational linguistics may offer an opportunity to better understand these challenging, though not unsayable, experiences. The pervasive assumptions about combat Gnosticism, the unsayability of trauma, and questions of who has access to these experiences led us to three research questions. First, how stable is the language of traumatic experience when it is refracted through different translators and different publishing contexts? Second, do veteran translators have special access to the discourse of trauma due to their veteran status? And third, a comparative close reading suggests that the non-veteran translators psychologize the narrative more. We want to ask, does a computational analysis yield the same result? Before we explore our methods, I'd like to share our findings at the outset. Across aligned sentences, Wien, Murdoch, and Rout's translations are largely equivalent in their trauma-relevant signals. Where differences appear, they are small, localized, and not systematically attributable to translator identity within the limits of our measures. The instruments show convergence on broad patterns of traumatic affect, even as they highlight specific loci where lexical and semantic choices admit modest variation. These results suggest that All Quiet exhibits a robust, translatable core of trauma language that survives re-expression by different translators, while still leaving room for meaningful, fine-grained differences that critics can explore through close reading. And now Dr. Park will discuss our methods.
Okay. Already I feel like we are running out of time, so I will make my portion short and sweet. And mine is not that exciting, like Sarah's. And I had to generate lots of Python scripts for my part. And I learned first programming in Python from my former teacher, Richard Sprott, who is sitting over there. So thank you so much. If it does not work though, then maybe that's not my fault, I don't know. So now, okay, I'm gonna walk through our methods. Once again, if we are running out of time, I'm gonna skip most of my slides. I'm gonna explain what we measured, how we built the data set, and how we tested for meaningful differences. I'm gonna also show how 3 complementary instruments let us see explicit wording, semantic fields, and inferred emotion. Think of this section in my portion as the blueprint that holds the results together. This is the overview. Our goal is strikingly simple and straightforward. We compare how 3 English translations render distressed language in dialogue and interior thought. So we align content at the sentence level so we can compare apples and apples, apples to apples. Then we score each sentence 3 ways. The first tool we used is called LIWC. It's a psychological word classes, determined and identified. W matrix tags semantic domains, Go emotions with BERT estimates fine-grained emotion. Combined, they give a fuller read on trauma language. So before I show the method, okay, I have to justify why we chose 3 distinct tools, because each tool sees a different slice. LIWC is a dictionary-based. So it counts words linked to anxiety, sadness, anger, or self-focus, etc. That anchors us to concrete lexical choices. So it's really tied to lexical words. W matrix, a little higher, okay, groups words into semantic fields. It can treat panic, shell shock, and panic attack as one domain, even if phrased differently. And this widens coverage beyond fixed lexicon. Of course, BERT, that one reads context as well. So it assigns probabilities to emotions that often signal trauma. So it can register fear or grief, even when explicit terms are absent. That helps us figurative language or understatement. Using all 3 reduces blind spots and cross-validates what we find. This is our pipeline. The diagram here shows the flow, our workflow. We started with the manual separation of dialogue and interior thought. So I'm going to explain why we did so. And we split into sentences, then align translations within a tight window. Then we exported 1 file per sentence per translator. After that, we scored with LIWC, W matrix, and Go emotions. Finally, we merge the outputs and analyze the aligned triplets. Each step keeps provenance and supports checks. So as Sarah explained, the translations, we compared 3 translations, Win, Murdoch, and Rout. This best limits content to dialogue and interior thought because we assumed that the characters' direct voices, where distress cues are clear, are found in those parts, not the narration part. And also we kept surface forms, which means no lemmatization, because the tools already provide the lemmatized forms. So as a result, we retrieved and we extracted a clean, comparable subset across translations. Then the separation, initial separation was done manually, but we made, particularly Sarah, made clear rules for our assistants. So they followed our guideline. We started first with the rules, that we didn't change it later. So the assistants followed our guidelines, and when there were some disputes, and we advised and give some information. And we also used conservative rules for sentence splitting. We respected titles, initials, ellipses, and quotation fragments. So multi-sentence lines were split so that alignment and scoring run at the sentence level. This makes cross-translator comparisons precise and reduces noise from long terms. So local alignment here. So the translation, as you know, can be different depending on translators. That means translator A's first sentence is not always sentence 1 in translator B's translation. So we extended the window ±5, so we found the best match using TF-IDF. But on top of that, for short words, we use short word sentence, we used character 3 to 5 grams. And the result here is clean, Murdoch, Win, Rout sentence triplets. So sentence by sentence alignment. So I call it local alignment. The per sentence export, 1 file per sentence per translator to feed external tools that work by file. And after scoring, then we reattached all metrics to the same raw. Okay, that's what we did. And W matrix post-process, it was surprisingly hard for me because the output was in HTML, so I had to code. Okay, I had to create lots of scripts to clean the data. So yes, okay, after cleaning it, we got the result. Then the measure, okay, LIWC scoring. Once again, LIWC is based on lexical entries. So we calculated, and W matrix calculation was done automatically. And I used BERT, Go Emotions. And Go Emotions assigns probabilities to many emotions. So for trauma, we sum sadness, fear, grief, remorse, and nervousness into a soft score per sentence, which means we averaged the scores. So Go Emotions have total over 27 emotions, but we chose 5 and we averaged it out. But all 3 tools now output different numbers, so we have to standardize, or we have to normalize. So we used pooled z-scores across translators. So scales are comparable. So after that, we fit mixed effects models with a random intercept for utterance. Each sentence brings its own baseline intensity from the source. So the model separates that from translator style, which means our interest is in the translator styles, not the original text intensity. After that, we used 2 one-sided tests. The smallest effect of interest is plus or minus 0.210, because this is convention. Then after that, we did a little bit of a sensitivity check by increasing the number to 0.15. then quality checks and reproducibility. So we recorded everything. So we created everything using Google Colab's notebooks. So anybody can run the same analysis with the same data. So the total we retrieved, extracted was 1,038 sentences. And once again, we extracted only thought and dialogue. The results here, this is forest plot. And look at the plot here. Each dot is a paired mean difference for a translator's pair. So bars show uncertainty. Dotted lines mark plus or minus 0.1. So win and route are equivalent. Murdoch's is slightly lower than both unselected LIWC categories, yet close to 0. The practical gap is really small. This is W matrix tool, the forest result, the same layout. All three pairs fall within plus or minus 0.1, which means practical equivalence on trauma-related fields like death, injury, and fear. Semantic domain choice appears stable, which means W matrix, again, across the translators at aligned sentence. The final one is co-emotions. The neural emotion score shows a nuance. Murdoch and Win are equivalent. Pairs that include route show small shifts that exceed the 0.10 band. But still, these are modest. They suggest route's rendering sometimes carries slightly higher or lower inferred effect than the other two. So what if we extend the window slightly more? So threshold widened to 0.15. Then every text falls into the same range, which means practically they are very stable. So this is a pairwise scatter of method signals. Unfortunately, this is not that pretty because they are so similar, so it's really hard to read. So here each dot is a sentence. I assume that you know the scatter plots, but it's not that great. So I will show just one example here. Okay? Here, the middle right panel, that one, okay, it's just the vertical, right? Go emotions on the y-axis and W matrix on the x-axis. The vertical spread shows go emotions differentiates among sentences more along those domains, while W matrix is flatter there. The two cover related ground but respond with different sensitivity. So blend Altman agreement now, I'm showing that. So the plot here compares the average of the two scores against their difference. The center line is near 0. That shows broad agreement with natural scatter. So go emotions runs slightly higher than LIWC on average. The typical spread between them is about 0.038 in standardized units. I'm showing another blend Altman agreement. So I'm gonna just sum up the result. And across dialogue and interior thought, trauma-relevant language is stable across translations. W matrix shows full equivalence at 0.1 for all three translators. And LIWC and go emotion show small localized shifts. All pairs equivalent at 0.15, more extended unit. So if I summarize everything in one sentence, different translators render distress in speech and thought in very similar ways. Any differences are small. Of course, okay, we have lots of limitations, so I will not read all of them. But one conspicuous limitation is, say, go emotion was trained on modern English data, but the text we are dealing was from 1920s. So there is a big difference. And what about the historical gap between the two? And then, so sentence level analysis definitely loses cross-sentence build-up, irony, and extended metaphors. So we are planning on those things too. So Sarah will close our talk. Thank you.
For a very brief discussion First, our research inquiries were, how stable is the language of traumatic experience? Do veteran translators have special access to the discourse of trauma? And it does appear, upon a close reading, that the non-veteran translators psychologize the narrative more. Does computational analysis bear that out? First, we found trauma is sayable. All three translators are talking about trauma, and to largely the same degree. As Paul Fussell suggested in The Great War in Modern Memory, we have made unspeakable mean indescribable. It really means nasty. In other words, our computational methods provide interpretive accountability. They resist contemporary debates that claim that trauma is unsayable. Second, a translator's habitus is less important. As I described earlier, it was Wien's veteran status that helped him land the role of translating the novel into its first English edition. And while the truism is, you had to be there to understand, we found that whether they had a military background or not, these translators arrived at essentially the same place. Third, literary analysis and close reading still matter. You see here the Wien translation, words, but they hold the horror of the war. Murdoch uses the more loving embrace, and Rout the more sterile encompass. These differences matter. So too, Wien would describe it as a panic, Murdoch, shell shock, and Rout, a panic attack. In closing, our results illuminate the extent, or lack thereof, of translator effect. We offer a distributional profile of the lexical semantic encoding of traumatic stance, distinguishing prevalence from intensity. We also model interpretive accountability. Computation emerges as a means of testing theoretically motivated claims with transparent, reproducible evidence. Thank you.